Hi all, good evening. My name's Debbie. I'm a Live for Love TV subscriber on YouTube. It's a very informative channel, so when you have a spare moment, please like, share and subscribe. Live for Love TV. Thank you.
Welcome back to Live for Love TV. Today's the 16th day of the 8th month of the 23rd year inside the 21st century. Hope everyone's doing extremely well out there. The other day I was talking to a young lady, precious young lady by the way, and we were talking about certain subjects, and she brought up the scientific argument to what the subject we were talking about, which is not important right now. And I was trying to say to her that I respect science, I respect a lot of scientists, and I respect some of the stuff that's happened over the last 200-300 years in Western modern day science. In those sciences as old as the day, it was back in Kemet, it was Egypt, it's been in Babylonia. There's been scientists all the time. But recent science, what we're talking about, the last 200-300 years, and she was bringing up some scientific arguments, and I was trying to say to her, listen, though you can read the scientific arguments, the real life experience along with the scientific arguments will give you a proper understanding. You can't lay your hat on just the writings in the book. You can't do that. And she'll know that I make the same arguments about religion. There must be some correlation with other things. There must be something that corroborates it. It can't be just its writings by itself. I always make this point on any writings. It's somebody has to know. Somebody has to say, yeah, that happened to me. Because whenever, for instance, when I read autobiographies, I'm not always reading just about the person's story. I'm watching the background of the environment they grew up in, the time they grew up in, how people were at that time, etc., etc., etc. So it's not just a person's story, but other things have to come out at the same time, and that's where you usually get the nuggets in anything that you're learning. But back to the scientific argument. What I was trying to say to her was that science came in 200-300 years ago to replace the religious order in Europe, in the West, and we're talking about written stuff now, right? So it's come to replace that, because I say replace because even though a lot of the original scientists were actually religious, eventually people started moving more away from religion and started saying that the scientific fact, this is a scientific fact, this is a scientific fact. And this is what she was trying to say to me, that something has come out in science and becomes a fact. But a fact, I know this may sound hard for people to believe, you need to look it up yourself, but fact is just something we agree on, something that we actually agree on, So really, what we think's a fact. Like if I find something in this yard today, and I pick it up and I say, this is a fact. This was buried here 25 years ago, and this is X, Y, or Z. This is what it's called. That may be a fact until somebody else comes and say, no, that was there 200 years ago, and this is what it was used for. And then somebody else comes. So the facts can be changed. It's what we agree on. Don't believe that when somebody say this is a scientific fact, that it can't be changed. We've had many scientific facts that have been changed throughout the years, even recently, the last 2-3 years with the pandemic. So we've seen, the shifting goalposts. One thing they're telling you this, now they're telling you something else, and then you realize science is it's not a stagnant thing. It moves along a spectrum. So as I was trying to say to the young lady, that I have to be very careful. That's why I think history is very important about these scientists, because 200 years ago, or thereabout, 250 years ago, science was used to denigrate my ancestors and anybody that came from my ancestry, my lineage, my look, from the continent of Africa right through. It was used for that reason. Now, this is post-slavery. They've already gone into slavery, but they've now needed, as their science has taken over, because they used religion to justify slavery originally, and you can find it in all the great books. Slavery is right there, front and center. The two greatest books that people talk about in religion today, slavery is in there and justifiably in there. So they used that, but then once that started to be challenged and started to say, well, this is not right, then science came over and took over, and then they justified stuff about the people that look like myself and my ancestors. Now, any of you who've watched the film Django will remember, I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio playing a part. I can't remember who he was playing, but he's talking about he's got a skull of a Negro, recently passed Negro slave, and he's describing why the Negro is different from the white man, where the white man has got so much sense that if somebody brutalized him and mistreated him the way the African was mistreated, he'd put a to their throats. And the Negro doesn't. Now the question is why? And he then takes up the skull and he starts to saw away a part of the brain, if you remember the film, and then he says there's a bit here that actually is enlarged, and this is the reason what makes basically submissive. It makes the Negro docile and submissive. This was his argument. Now this is a farmer. This is a slave owner. Where did he get it from? He got that from science. Science had come out with these and they've named this particular condition that the Negro apparently had, which has been debunked now, obviously, but it's what they were saying back to X amount 100 years ago. And what people have to understand is when people like talk about Adolf Hitler or the the people in South Africa that took over South Africa for all those years, the people who took over Zimbabwe, Rhodesia next to South Africa, the people that took over all these places, the Caribbean, the Churchills that made all these statements. People have got to understand these guys didn't come out for themselves. They didn't just come out one day and say, oh, I know the Negro is inferior. Their best minds that they claimed they had at the time, the scientists, just like the scientists now, the best minds that they have, were the ones who were telling them all this stuff. So if you look right across the board in European history, American history, Australian history, anywhere, Canadian history, anywhere the European has migrated to, in Africa, as I said, parts of Africa, he comes up with the same argument about the Negro and about the brain of the Negro being inferior to the European's brain. And as I said to you already, he gets it from his scientists. Now, did any single scientist that was saying this, that had studied this, did they truly believe it? You bet they didn't. They didn't believe it. They said it because it suited their purpose of slavery, colonialization. They were told what to say and what to produce and what facts to come out with. And they even named these things. And you can go around and find there's actually names for these things. In fact, I read something somewhere, I don't know if I've got it somewhere here. Drapetomania. Drapetomania. Now, drapetomania is a mental condition that the slaves in America had when they ran away from the good life they had as slavery. Could you imagine that? So there was something mentally wrong with a slave who ran away from the plantation. This is what the European told himself and his science people told them one another. And they called it drapetomania. There's something wrong. I mean, what such a good life he's got here. What's wrong with him? He's got to have some sort of a mental illness for him to want to run and leave this plantation. I'm laughing because it's laughable. I'm not going to start crying on camera, but it's laughable that these people are so delusional that they can come up with foolishness and then come up with names and stamp names on this foolishness. And then, as I was trying to say to the young lady, this is the problem, because if you let someone be so dominant over you, and I say let, and I'm going to say it whether people like it or not, whether you lose a war or not, if you let people be so dominant over you, they can say anything they want and any rule, anything. You can't, that's what domination means. You can't challenge, you can't say anything, you can't, bring it up. You remember, we were supposed to be so dumb that we couldn't take in any information. Yet these were the same people who were saying if any Negro was found reading, he would be killed or hanged. Why? Because if you were so dumb and you were found reading, what good would it do you? No, it wouldn't do you any good. So they knew what they were saying was backward and didn't make any sense, but they just said it anyway because it suited their capitalistic financial situation of superiority. That's what it fitted. So I'm only talking about these things so that anybody here who wants to come and give me a scientific argument, I'll argue with you because I read science and I like science, and I pick out, just like I would pick out from any book or any scripture or any reading, the good things, the things I can test and prove for myself. But the things that to me are absolute folly and foolishness, I just throw them away. I don't deal with them. I don't get into arguments about them. So for instance, this particular thing, that you can get scientists to say whatever you want. 2-3 years ago, that's exactly what they did. They came out with all this stuff, and now it's slowly being uncovered bit by bit by bit. And now this is what happened. The scientists are even though they may not claim it, but they are the rulers. Right now, they're at the state of rulership, because whoever's ruling is giving their final say to the scientists. They're following the science. And this is what they were doing before to get their scientists to back it up. So I call them they're just as good as the rulers. They're the same. They're in the same position. They're at the same place. So you must be very careful when you read science, just like reading anything, scripture, anything, that you know what you're taking in. It's not just paraphrase. You can't read something and say, oh, I read it, therefore it's true. You still have to be able to test it and critically analyze it. If you can't do that, you're wasting your time reading. You might as well not read. If it says Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, you have to understand that. You have to say, well, why would somebody go uphill to get water? Why? Why is the water uphill? Doesn't water normally be found down in streams? You have to test these things for yourself and think about them. But they're just sayings. You don't read something and say, oh, I read this here. It's 100% true. The scientist said, the religious man said, this man said, that man, the philosopher said. You still have to be able to critically analyze it so you can uplift yourself. But that's all knowledge is. If it doesn't uplift you, then it's a waste. It's just one more, thing in your brain that's going to probably give you a lot more trouble as you get older. Yeah. So watch out for some of these scientists. And for the young lady I was talking to, who's very intellectual and very clever. As you go along life, you're going to realize that everything has to be tested. You can't just let someone say he's been in the lab and he's this and he's that and he's that, because he'll leave you with his theories. He'll leave you with this and with that, and he'll get his Nobel Peace Prize. And then when we'll go through generation, then we'll find out the guy was completely wrong. In fact, what he said made no sense. With he's got missing link, in his theory. Of course, he's got a missing link in his theory because it's wrong. It's wrong. He's linked foolishness together, and then he can't find the link that links the next part. It shows you it's wrong. That shows you it's wrong. You can't have a missing link in something that makes sense. Well, there would be no missing link. It would be just from 1 to 10. You can't say I can get to 1 to 10, but there's no 5. Or there's it's foolishness. There has to be numbers that go from chronologically from place to place, and this is why Darwin has the missing link, and this is why these scientists you have to be very careful, because they're power mad, just like the feudal religious kings and queens of the old days and the priests. They were power mad. They want to have power over people, and they'll come up with all kind of stuff for you to believe them. So think about these things before you jump in, and take care. See you soon. Live for Love TV.